Hello and welcome to another video in the Simplified opening series. In today's video, I would like to talk about yet another idea that I discovered while working on my chessable courses. In this case, it was 1d4 Simplified. And while I was working on that course, I wanted to pay particular attention to how to meet the King's Indian defense. Now, the reason for this is that, it's a personal thing, because I have played the King's Indian with black pieces myself for a very long time, ever since I was a child and for many decades. And I think a lot of people are attracted to the King's Indian because even though you may be dead lost, there would always be some sort of tricks and traps and attacks that can allow you to turn the game around. Now, I mean, I admit it, I have done that myself. You can actually check the video on my channel, one of the most exciting games I have played. It is in the King's Indian where I was that lost, but then again, with some spectacular sacrifices, I turned it around and I won a game. So when I started playing d4 myself, my first and foremost task was to find a line against the King's Indian defense that would not allow attacks, tricks, and traps. So I had quite of a journey there, starting with the fianchetto variation, then going for the Gligorich system, bishop e2, bishop e3, then going for the even the four pawns attack, trying to be hyper aggressive against the King's Indian, and eventually settling down to the Makagonov variation with h3, which is all the rage nowadays, and one of the main reasons why the King's Indian is not played so much on the highest levels. However, the opening remains very popular at lower levels, and when I was working on the course, I figured that this line, all these lines wouldn't really be appropriate because they have quite a lot of theory in them. So I was trying to find ways how to deal with the King's Indian, having this in mind, not allowing attacks and tricks and traps, while at the same time keeping the amount of theory low. So I think I managed to do that, and I will show you that line here, which, as I say, features an idea that is not covered in great depth in the course. It's just briefly mentioned, and it's also only mentioned in the actually in the model game section. And the game, that model game, I will tell you, it's the model game Grishchu Caruana, which you can look it up yourself in the database. That one is well analyzed, but it's not the main recommendation in the course. So after d4, knight f6, c4, g6, we start with the move knight f3, and after bishop g7 we play the move e3. Now the big bonus of this line is that effectively avoids the Grunfeld defense, and this is huge because the Grunfeld is again another extremely popular opening and with a lot of theory. And what's even more problematic, I would say, is that there is no clear-cut um, let's say direction which white should take to kind of squash black's dynamic potential. In the King's Indian, a few lines like these exist. I mentioned them. Let's say the Makagonov, the bishop e2, bishop e3 line without knight f3, which is also popular, and so forth. Maybe the fianchetto as well. But in the Grunfeld, things are not that clear. So I think it's massive if you can actually manage to avoid the Grunfeld and avoid having to study it. And this is possible by playing this move e3. The idea, of course, is to withhold the development of the knight to c3, as after which d5, and we get the Grunfeld. So the point after e3, short castle, bishop e2 is, like I said, to keep the knight on b1 until black has played d6. So the point is that if now black plays d5, it's actually not that great because cd5, knight d5, e4, even though white lost the tempo, there is no knight takes c3, bc3, and c5 like in the Grunfeld. And after knight b6 short castle, white actually has a very favorable position because it has a good center. Knight on b6 is kind of a liability subject to some a4, a5 attacks, and white gets to defend the center with bishop e3, knight bd2, or knight c3, depending on circumstances. This is good, yeah. So this is already a massive advantage over entering the mainline Grunfeld theory. So d5 is bad, and we will concentrate on the King's Indian move here, d6. I will briefly mention that c5 is also possible when white has a choice. One is to go into the Benoni after d5, let's say d6, knight c3, e6, let's say castles takes, and we have a Benoni where white has played this e3 and bishop e2. Yeah, but it's still a Benoni, yeah, as Nigel Short would say. It's maybe a good Benoni, but it's still a Benoni. So this depends on your taste. In the course, I actually recommend not going for the Benoni and just playing d takes e5 and trying to establish this grip, knight c3, and grip on the d5 square, and possibly followed by b3, bishop b2, but care should be exerted with the things happening on the long diagonal. So the theory is in the course, yeah, if you're really interested, you can check it out. So d6 is the king's Indian move, and now once d6 has been played, knight c3 is perfectly fine, as we have no room for anymore. Now knight bd7, this is the standard king's Indian development, intending e5. Important note, if black goes knight c6 with the same idea, yeah, the knight on c6 is a bit more active than on d7, it's important not to allow that and to play the move d5. Yeah, kick that knight, and then black won't get the standard king's Indian structure because white will most likely take en passant on e6. So knight bd7, and now short castle. Now in the course, the line I analyze in the course, it starts with the move b4. This is a pretty fresh direction and involves postponing castling by white. But here we take a look at, like I said, another idea that I discovered. So short castle, e5 by black. Yeah, and just to make it clear what black wants to do, black wants to go e4, put the rook on e8 to defend that pawn on e4, then go knight f8, h5, h4, possibly all the way to h3. Bishop goes to f5 to defend one more time the pawn on e4. Knight from f8 goes to h7, g5, and then some sacrificial ideas start to happen on the king side. So this is the long-term plan of black's attack. What we are going to do here is try to prevent it or make it rather useless. Now, a very interesting thing here in this position is that Ding Liren himself in this position has played a couple of times the move e4. And then you would say, what's going on here? Yeah, and I would ask the same, what's going on here? White is actually transposing to a proper King's Indian a tempo down. So e3 first, e4 then. But the thinking here, this is the engine's also, the engine's main preference in this position. And this is funny because how bad should the King's Indian be if white should lose a tempo, go e3 and e4, transpose to a proper King's Indian, and still have some slight advantage? Yeah. The main idea, as I see it, is that white has forced black into the lines with knight bd7 and not knight c6 and the Mar del Plata variation. Because the main attacks in the King's Indian, they happen in the Mar del Plata variation. Knight c6, d5, knight e7, and then black launches a storm. But now with the knight on d7, the lines are more positional. There are not really any attacks. And white can, as Ding Liren showed, can even waste a tempo, play e3, 4 just to force black into these lines with knight bd7. Now, if you're comfortable playing this, or you're comfortable playing against the King's Indian, the main lines, this can be a useful addition to your repertoire because you want to avoid the Mar del Plata, you want to avoid the Grunfeld, but you don't mind playing these lines with knight bd7, so you happily waste the tempo and enter these lines and have a good position. So that's a kind of a curiosity, yeah. But okay, let's just continue and let me show you the idea. So queen c2, preventing e4 for the time being, yeah. So rook e8, and now comes the moment where actually the idea I had in mind starts to happen. In the model game, in the course, the game Grishchu Caruana, the move rook d1 was played, yeah, allowing e4, knight d2, and then b4, and so forth. It's very interesting, leading to complex play. I think white is somewhat better there, but it's a complex position and obviously quite playable. And you can check the game. White obtained a good advantage in it, and it's not so easy for black to play those positions, even though, as I explained, the plan is straightforward. Let's say knight f8, bishop f5, and so forth. But white is actually quite fast on the queen side by pushing maybe d5 or c5, depending on circumstances. So this is the model game in the course, Grishchu Caruana, but okay, you can check it in the database as well. Now, when I keep saying the idea, actually there are two ideas. Yeah, it's one bonus idea. Bear in mind that motivation for these ideas is to prevent black's attack on the king side. So the main idea that I wanted to show you starts with the move d takes e5, and we will explore this one in some detail. But there is one more which I also discovered while looking at the working on the course, and that one is aimed at undermining black's pawn on e4. So when black plays e4, white wants to undermine it by f3 or just going f4 and shutting the position down on the king side. So how does that happen? We start with b3. It may sound weird, it may look weird, but white wants to keep the structure compact on the queen side because the plan is to play in the center and on the other side of the board. So how does that happen? So e4, knight d2, the pawn is attacked 3 times, so black defends into queen e7, now bishop b2 developing, knight f8, and now rook a e1. Now already this tells you that white is aiming to play in the center with f3, undermining the pawn, or f4, as we shall see. So bishop f5 now, for the time being. Black stops these ideas because ef3 would hit the queen on c2. The queen drops back to d1. d1 important because it's important to control the g4 square, as we shall see. h5, yeah, and now comes the key move f4. So the idea of the move is that once there is a pawn on f4, the black cannot even dream of any threats on the king side. Well, I mean, there is no knight g5, and there is white is controlling more space on the king side, so this is quite safe. But now black's decision is what to do. Should black take on f3 and open the center, after which white is well prepared, as we shall see, or just let the pawn stay on f4? Now, in both situations, white has good play. It's quite a complex game, a complex position, but we achieve the main objective. There is no attack. Yeah? So let's say if black starts with something like c6, d5 is a nice move, yeah, opening the long diagonal, yeah, and containing a positional trap. If black closes the center with c5, white is now white who starts attack on the king side with the move h3 and threatening g4. And this is why the queen should have gone to d1 to support the g4 push. So the idea is to go g4 and then maybe even g5, hitting that knight on f6, which in turn weakens the defense of the e4 pawn. The queen can come to b1 to hit the pawn one more time and defend the bishop on b2 in case of exchanges, yeah, on e4 when the long diagonal is opened. So this is already very good for white, and black cannot really stop the opening of the g file. For example, if g4, sorry, if h4, then king h1, and the rook comes to g1, g3 happens, yeah, and then rook g3, maybe rooks can be doubled on the g file, rook g5, maybe sacrifice on f5, the long diagonal will be opened, sorry, the g file will be opened, and white can start attacking on the king side. Yeah. So this is a position with a long-term advantage to white. It's quite an interesting positional, I would say, trap, yeah, which black can fall into if doesn't really understand the position. So let's go back then and explore what if black decides to take en passant. He takes f3, bishop takes f3. Now you understand why the rook was necessary on e1. Rook a e1 was played so that now the pawn on e3 is defended. Additionally, the rook supports a further advance with e4. Now, a good idea to know for white is that going bishop d3, hitting the rook, allows white to sacrifice an exchange with a very favorable, well, it's not actually a sacrifice of an exchange, it's a tactical operation that basically wins a pawn. Bishop takes f1, bishop takes a8, and white is much better here. Yeah, the knight f1 will happen and e3 will be defended in case black takes on a8. So c6 is better to shut the long diagonal. And now it's important to play the move d5. The idea is that with d5, the pawn is removed from the d4 square. Why is that important? Well, the natural e4 can be met by knight g4. Yeah, and then there is this bishop d4 check. Yeah. And okay, this is probably playable for white, but it's better to avoid these complications by playing something like d5. And after c5, then go e4. So another complex position. Objectively, black should be fine here. There are some complications starting with knight g4 and so forth. You can take a look at this yourself. But again, what I see it as the most important thing is that the character of the position has been changed. There is no attack. It is white who is playing in the center, compact position for white, and all the game lies ahead. So this is the bonus idea, yeah, that you can play in the position after rook e8 if you prefer that type of position. Now the main idea I wanted to show you starts with the move d takes e5. Now black should take with the pawn, because taking with the knight after knight e5, knight e5, d5 just allows white extremely easy play. Rook d1, hitting the queen, and then when the queen moves, knight d5. See, the knight is very nice on d5, must be exchanged, knight e5, cd5, and this is quite comfortable for white. Bishop d2, bishop c3, maybe the pawn on c7 is backward, rook c1, very easy play. Yeah, if e4, bishop d2, and then bishop comes to c3, so simplified position, but the long-term prospects are definitely with white. That is why black should take with the pawn, d takes e5, and now b4. So what have we achieved compared to the positions which are without taking on e5? Well, we have the open d file, and this is a major difference, because with an open d file, black can't easily create any threats on the king side. Even more so because white will be the first one to control the file with rook d1. Yeah? And having an open file in the center obviously transfers the weight of the ensuing middle game in the center. Now black will try to create some threats on the king side, but we will see that they are first of all not obvious, yeah? And second that they are not as serious as in a more closed position and is in the king's Indian. So b4, yeah, and now c6. Black must play c6 sooner rather than later because the d5 square is of vital importance in this position. Otherwise, white would jump to d5 at some point. So c6, bishop b2, continuing development, e4. Otherwise, how does black continue? Yeah, white's plan is really straightforward. Just wanting to go c5, then maybe putting a knight on c4, landing on d6. It's really straightforward play. So e4, knight d4 now, and knight e5. Yeah. So now we have this situation in the center where black has grabbed some space with e4 and has a centralized knight on e5. But this also is not for free. And the reason this is not for free is that pawn on e4 is always under attack. And this makes the position, I think, more difficult to play with black because he always needs to find ways how to tactically defend that pawn on e4 because it's constantly under attack. So he will always have to calculate what happens if white takes that pawn. Now, the tactical defense in this position is that knight e4, knight e4, queen e4 is met by knight c4. Yeah, so the queen is attacked and black gains the bishop pair. But this will always hang in the air. Yeah, and some positions white can go for this sequence, and black needs to be careful at all times. However, there is another aspect in this position which makes it problematic for black, and that is the development of the light squared bishop. Now, if you look at it, this knight on d4 is very good at preventing the development. e6 and f5 are both controlled. The bishop will be chopped off if it goes there. There is one more square g4, which white, with his next move h3, takes away. Yeah, and that means that the bishop's only developing square is d7. Doesn't look too great, but that's the best black can do. So this makes it a bit, I think, claustrophobic for black to play. Yeah, bishop must go to d7 to connect the rooks, but it's not doing much there. Yeah, still, black must take what he has. So bishop d7 should be played. If black starts something like queen e7, yeah, attacking the pawn on b4, then c5 is part of white's plan. Yeah, and the point is, after c5, now there is a threat against that pawn because knight c4 doesn't come with tempo. Yeah, and besides, the queens will be exchanged. So now the knight on the pawn on e4 is hanging, and it's not so easy for black to defend it. Yeah, so if bishop d7, simply take the pawn. So bishop d7 should be played, and now rook d1. We said that white will be the first one to occupy the file. There is also an alternative here in c5. Yeah, c5 threatening knight e4. So black again, if he's not to immediately end up in a bad position a pawn down, he should really seek some tactical play. And this tactical play is not easy to come up with. I mean, the engine obviously comes up with it really easily, but for a human, I think this is not so easy. For example, to show you here what black should play best, he should go queen c8 and start threatening some bishop h3 idea. So let's say 94, 94, queen e4, knight c4, bishop queen c2, take on b2, queen b2, and now bishop h3. Yeah, but again, not very obvious. Even this is playable for white, yeah, because there is a strong knight on c4, on d4, and white is not forced to take on h3. But these are the types of kind of escape hatches based on tactics that black must find. But we start with rook fd1. Now queen c8 again. Yeah. Again, I don't think this is easy play for black, but we assume that we are playing against I don't know, Carlsen, yeah, or maybe even somebody stronger, which is the engine, and we assume that they find these best moves and they try to create as many problems for us as possible. So there are some threats on h3, so we play bishop f1. And this is, again, very safe, very solid for white, whose play on the queen side is much easier than black's on the other side of the board. So what does black do now? Yeah. Let's examine what happens if black loses patience and goes g5, intending g4. White has two options now. One is to go for the opening in the center, 94, 94, queen e4, knight c4, queen drops back to c2, take on b2, queen b2, when g5 is out of place. Yeah, they just weakened black's king side. And there is also some weakening of the f5 square. For now, it cannot be taken advantage of, but there is still some weakening. And long term, this means that white has the safer king than black. Black has the pair of bishops, but white has the safer position. This is one option. But there is another one which is worth taking note of, and that is knight ce2. Now, the point of the move is that white wants to either go to g3 and continue attacking the pawn on e4, but also controlling the f5 square. Yeah. Or in case of, let's say, g4, h4, there is also a juicy square on f4, yeah, apart from g3. And the third point is that allowing knight d3, which looks like a huge blunder, yeah, just allow a knight to d3. If you come down, you see that the knight is actually not threatening anything except for, well, that pawn. But after simple bishop c3, yeah, the knight will be pushed away after knight g3, attacking that pawn and attacking the knight. And black is pushed back, yeah, and white is taking over. So losing patience with g5 and weakening the position is not really an option for black. h5 is better. It still kind of gains some space on the king side, but doesn't weaken the position. Now white can continue in more than one way. Yeah, one way is, for example, to go rook ab1. Yeah, just a small move, defending the bishop and maybe covering the b4 pawn in some future. Yeah, and passing the move on uh, to black. For example, to show you the idea, queen c7 and now again knight c2. The idea is to reroute the knights. Yeah, the knight can come to b3 and c5, and the other one can come to d4, go to g3, and attack this pawn on e4. Yeah. So just maneuvering, yeah, taking advantage of the extra space on the queen side. And if knight d3, now the bishop drops back to a1, thanks to that move rook b1, and the knight again goes to g3 and getting rid of that knight on d3. Yeah. So you see that black cannot just play just throwing the pieces forward. Another idea for white is to go knight a4 and aim for the c5 square. So what does black do here? Yeah, he can try to stop it by b6, but after c5, b5, knight c3, now white has this idea of a4 and opening the queen side. Don't forget that without a pawn on c4, there is always the threat of knight e4. Yeah, and there is no knight c4 will not regain a pawn. So black should try something active, a5, b takes a5, rook takes a5, a4. White willingly opens the position on the queen side because b takes a4, knight takes a4. There is already a threat of knight b6, and white is taking over the initiative here already. So black should play b4, and after knight e4, knight e4, queen e4, rook c5, knight b3. We have, again, quite a complex position. There are some complications starting after the move rook d5 in this position. You can check these yourself. But again, black is forced to kind of come up with difficult moves and ideas to justify that he's not worse. Because if you look at it, just pretty much everything hangs. The rook, the pawn, there is a passed pawn on the a file. White is very solid. His position, his pieces control the center, and it's black must resort to tactical means to kind of stay afloat. So that's, let's say, one idea with b6. Yeah, black can allow the move knight c5, but in order to do that, he needs to be really um astute when it comes to finding tactics. So queen c7, knight c5, and now bishop g4. Yeah, again, not a very obvious idea. Going back to c8 is possible, but then the whole idea of development just falls through. Yeah, I mean, what did black do? Queen, bishop d7, queen c8, queen c7, bishop c8, just doing nothing, and white can simply go to d2. Yeah, avoiding these bishop g4 ideas in the future, attacking the rook and just wanting maybe to double. Yeah, at some point intending maybe to take on e4, depending. Yeah, but that trick with knight c4 just depends. Yeah, and again, just keep on building up the position, whereas black is kind of feeling stuck for ideas. So bishop g4 is best. Yeah. The point being that if hg, knight g4, and there is this trick of, well, threatening mate. Yeah, so g3, h4, it's getting a bit complicated. We don't want that. So we go bishop e2. Just cynically, exchanging the black's attacking pieces. So bishop takes the a2, knight takes e2, b6, getting rid of the knight. And again, there is a choice. Do you want to simplify more, or you want to keep more pieces on the board? Knight b3 is keeping more pieces on the board. If knight d3, bishop c3, yeah, defending the pawn, and then getting rid of the knight by knight c1. That's one idea. And the other idea is the more simple one. Take on e5, queen a takes e5, knight b3. And now again, c5 is on the agenda, yeah, which will win an eternal square on d4 for a white piece. d6 can also be targeted, maybe rook d6. Yeah, the knight can maneuver going to d4, going to g3, yeah, going to f4, depending on circumstances. Yeah, and again we have a relatively simplified position. Again, no attacks whatsoever, and white has this play on the queen side, maybe a4, a5 at some point also with the well, normal play. Objectively, it's fine for both sides, but again, I think throughout it has always been easier for white to come up with his own play rather than black always having to calculate a lot of lines, taking care of the e4 pawn, and trying to stay afloat with some not that easy tactical lines and complications. So this wraps up this video. Uh, I hope you like the line. I think it's a good practical choice against the King's Indian and against the Grunfeld for sure. And again, if you like to explore more about this, I would invite you to check my 1d4 simplified course on Chessable, because it has also lines which well, are not analyzed here, and I mentioned it kind of fresh, not so uh, played so much, and it also involves the analysis of the critical game for this variation, the game Grischuk Caruana from 2013. So guys, thanks for watching. Now is the time when I do my cowboy Hikaru thing. Smash that subscribe button. And yeah, I will see you soon again next week, next Saturday, when I come up with something else in this simplified opening series. Take care all and see you soon. Cheers.